Good morning, fellas. Today's video is a little bit of a follow-up to the last video, which of course was about my personal training routine, what it generally looks like, how much martial arts training I do, how much endurance training I do. But most of the video was especially about my strength and muscle building routine. And in that video, I believe somewhere at the very beginning, I mentioned that I used to train 6 days a week last year, and that I dropped down to the 5 days a week routine that I then talked about in the last video, sort of at the beginning of this year, so a few months ago. And I said I was gonna mention why I did that, or go into why I did that a little bit, talk about training volume, that type of stuff, but I didn't end up doing it because the video ended up being decently long on its own, and also at the end I was under a little bit of time pressure. I had to go eat breakfast and my phone was dying. So the video ended up getting cut short a little bit, and I missed out on talking about this aspect. And there is some other stuff that I can go into in relation to this topic of training volume, specifically how many days you would train, but also other types of training volume as well. And so in this video, I'm going to take a little bit of a nostalgia ride. I'm going to look at the past a little bit and compare what I was doing last year to what I am doing now, explain why, talk about training volume, training intensity, and make the topic complete, if you will. So let's jump into that right away. Last year, I was training 6 days a week. Sunday was my rest day, and the rest of the week I was training. And on top of this fact, I was generally doing, I'd say, a similar amount of sets per training day as I'm doing now. Maybe there was one day where I was doing a little bit less, but generally speaking, the amount of sets was pretty comparable. So I was actually overall doing more volume than I am right now. One of the reasons why is because I was training lower intensity than I am right now. With my current training, I think I can add a set here or there. Every now and then I will. I just recently added an extra set for triceps because I felt like they weren't getting as much work as they should be. So on one day where I was just doing 2 sets of dumbbell skull crushers, I added another set in there. That's possible. I can add a set here and there. But generally speaking, the type of volume or the amount of volume I'm doing right now is pretty solid. Like, I couldn't go much higher than what I'm doing right now at the sort of intensity I'm training at without essentially messing up my fatigue to recovery ratio. So how was I doing substantially more volume last year? Well, I was training differently. What you have to keep in mind is that I do train for muscle growth generally because I have a goal that I am aiming for. Maybe for those that are a little newer to the channel, don't know what I'm currently shooting for. I am at the moment bulking up to 92, 93 kilos, so around 200 pounds, a little over 200 pounds. And I'm aiming for that weight at under 20% body fat. So essentially with more or less visible abs still. That's kind of my rough gauge for body fat percentage. I don't measure my body fat. I don't use weird, inaccurate fucking neck to waist ratio measurements or some shit. That stuff doesn't work. And for me, generally, the best gauge is to just look in the mirror and see if my 6-pack is more or less still there when I flex my abs a little bit. And if it is, I'm at a low enough body fat percentage to where it's okay. If my six pack were to vanish, I'd say that's roughly the sort of limit. And from that point forward, I would try to maintain where I'm currently at and sort of recomp before adding additional calories. Bit of a side tangent there. Back to my current goal. I'm shooting for those 92, 93 kilograms at, just under 20% body fat. So high teens, essentially. And then from there, I'm going to cut down to the kind of body fat that I actually sit at more naturally, because I'm naturally not someone who eats a lot in relation to what his maintenance calories are. I do like to eat a lot during individual meals, but generally speaking, if I don't actively think about eating, if I'm not actively sort of planning when do I get my protein, when do I get my calories in, I'm just not thinking about it and, doing other stuff, working on projects, that type of thing, I will generally not eat anything for the entire first half of the day. And then at some point I get kind of hungry, I'll eat one big meal, and then a few hours later I'll eat a second meal that is maybe a little bit smaller, but still pretty sizable, and that's all I do in the day. So naturally, I sort of tend towards a lower calorie intake, which means bulking is actually pretty sweaty for me. And once I get to those 92, 93 kilograms, I'm going to cut down to the body fat percentage that I more naturally sit at, which is going to be some 12 to 14%. I know people like to underestimate their body fat percentage that they're at. I think this is more of a realistic estimate. So pretty ripped, decently ripped, but also not absurdly shredded. And I'm going to stay at that body fat percentage more or less and work my way up more slowly from there with more of a main gaining approach. So I'll eat maybe a little bit above maintenance, but if I don't feel like it, I'll eat below maintenance. And if I'm cutting down from 18, 19% body fat at 93 kilograms, I should be at around 88 kilograms. So roughly my current weight after the cut when I'm at 12%, 13% body fat. But I'll obviously be much higher muscle and much lower fat than I currently am. And that's more or less my target weight. And from that point forward, again, I'm still going to do strength training, but I'm going to focus much more on training a lot more functionally. So muscle growth is going to be less of a focus point in my training. I'm also going to do more martial arts training than I currently do. And I'll probably reach those 93 kilograms maybe around this time next year. Might take a little bit longer. We'll see. But so far, I've made pretty good progress. I've actually been a lot faster on my gaining journey than I expected. So yeah, maybe in a year and a half, I should probably be there. And then cutting down from there is probably going to be pretty fast, a comparatively fast process, maybe a few months or something like that. Long story short, as you can tell, I have a pretty comprehensive plan when it comes to my goals for muscle growth. However, I still don't exclusively train for hypertrophy because at the end of the day, I am not a bodybuilder. I'm someone who trains for real world capabilities. And that is not to say, I talked about this in a recent video on quote unquote fake muscle. That is not to say that bodybuilders aren't strong, that they can't use their muscles. But they can use their muscles to a lesser extent than other people, both in terms of strength endurance and sort of absolute strength, 1 rep maxes, that type of thing. And also just in terms of general athletics, agility, skill, etc., because obviously they don't train that. And so while my current focus is building muscle, because as I explained also in a recent video, in the Get Big First sequel video, it does make sense as a young man to focus a substantial amount of your training on actually growing your muscles, because this is the best time to do it. While I am doing that, I also need to be looking out for other things, or should be looking out for them, at least, if I want to be physically capable, and not just big, but also somewhat, if I want my strength endurance, that type of stuff, if I want that to be at least somewhat proportional to my size, I do need to train it a little bit. So that's what I do. I currently do a lot of exercises on my muscle growth training at very low rep ranges to also recruit more muscle fiber, right? To train muscle fiber recruitment, to train the nervous system. And this is somewhat shifting right now because I'm moving to a different focus. But for the last couple of months, essentially for the first half of this year, so since January, February, that kind of time roundabout, I've been focusing a lot on this kind of strength side. I'm still training for hypertrophy, but my sets go to, at the very highest, like 12 reps. And with these kinds of rep ranges that reach up to 12 reps, we're talking about very lightweight exercises. Generally, any kind of major exercise, and really most exercises, stay below 10 reps. And even with things like curls, I'm going to 8-9 reps max, while with actual like really heavy exercises, things like weighted pull-ups, that kind of stuff, dumbbell bench press, I'm essentially going for like 3, 4 to 6 reps. So very, very low rep ranges. Compared to last year, those rep ranges are extremely low. And again, I'm doing this because currently I'm focusing a little more on training strength, on training my nervous system in addition to growing muscle. Now, last year, when I was doing significantly more volume, I was actually also training in higher rep ranges. So I was training more days per week across those 6 days a week, so one rest day less. Across those 6 days, I was doing more total sets because I was doing a pretty similar amount of sets per day. And then those sets were also generally, on average, much higher reps. So some of those sets might have been, 8 to 12 reps, something like that. But I was also going into 20, 25, 30 reps on some of the lightweight exercises, where now currently my rep range would be like 8 to 12. And the reason why was because last year I was very focused on strength endurance. So it made a lot of sense to train in higher rep ranges because that just challenged my cardiovascular system more. And especially on shoulder exercises where I was using light weight, I went for very, very high reps because I was training to keep my arms up and use my arms to do stuff for extended periods of time above my head. And to move your arms around up here, you need a lot of strength endurance in your shoulders. So I was training in these higher rep ranges for my shoulder muscles, but I was also doing other exercises, and in fact some very heavyweight exercises like pull-ups, for example, in high rep ranges. So I was doing weighted pull-ups, not with a ton of weight added, of course, because the higher the rep range, the lower the potential weight you will be using if you're going close to or to failure. But on pull-ups, I remember going to 12, 13, 14 reps with extra weight added, even though that's a pretty heavyweight exercise, right? It's a compound exercise for the back that uses a lot of big movers. And I'd say 14 reps for an exercise like that is a pretty high amount of reps. Conversely, of course, I was not using as much weight as I'm using right now. And that is in part because I have, of course, progressed since then, but it is also in part because I am training at lower rep ranges. So I progressed to higher weights, definitely, but I also changed my programming and specifically inserted lower rep ranges, changed exercises to lower rep ranges to sort of switch the focus. Because again, I trained for strength endurance last year, and for that purpose, these higher rep ranges were very well suited. But I did want to change the focus for this year, and so I selected lower rep ranges. And I would be able to do the rep ranges I did last year if I sort of took 1 or 2 weeks to get used to that kind of volume again. I would be able to do them at significantly higher weight still because I just progressed significantly in my training since then. But again, I intentionally don't do so, or intentionally didn't do so, and I'll touch on that in a moment, because my focus in training switched. So all of this essentially has nothing to do with muscle growth. Besides my hypertrophy goals, besides my goals of growing muscle, getting to a specific weight, these are the kind of side projects I do as well. And this is the type of stuff I would recommend to you if you've gotten to a very solid level of physical fitness and you've got similar goals to me. You're aiming for a generally fit, physically capable, powerful physique. You want to be all around just a beast. I would recommend looking at these weaknesses. Is my strength endurance whack at the moment? Is my max strength whack at the moment? Like I have very big muscles, but I can't fully utilize their potential because my nervous system isn't trained well. Look at this type of stuff, and you can kind of incorporate it into your muscle building programs, into your muscle building training, because you can select quite high and quite low rep ranges and still make muscular gains, but it'll just change the focus of what you're training in terms of other stuff, in terms of your nervous system, in terms of your cardiovascular system. And this will allow you to set a different focus depending on what you want to work on the side. Now, I've kind of completed my sort of strength-focused training for now, and I'm slowly transitioning into higher rep ranges again at the moment because I want to improve my strength endurance a little bit again. So what I just talked about actually applies more so to the last few months than it does to right now. I'm in a bit of a transitionary period at the moment, and going forward in about 2 or 3 weeks, I will be at similar rep ranges as I was last year, obviously with significantly more weight. But yeah, I'm aiming for more reps again and less progress on the sort of weight side. So getting more and more and more reps in, and then every now and then increasing the weight, as opposed to really pushing through very small rep ranges and then increasing the weight very consistently. And I will likely increase the volume again, even though I'm training with more weight now. This is kind of what I wanted to get at really with this video, is the fact that in my opinion, when you're training in higher rep ranges, ironically, because of course you're technically doing more reps, so even though the effort is perhaps not the same in terms of doing the actual movement, you're doing more. But I think that you can actually train at a higher volume if you're not using a lot of weight, even though you're already doing more reps. Because in my experience, the fatigue on the nervous system is much more intense than the fatigue on the cardiovascular system and the muscles in general. And I don't think it's just one factor involved here. I don't think it's just nervous system fatigue. I think there's also the fact that when you train at higher rep ranges, when you're above 15 reps, certainly when you're going above 20 reps, 25 maybe even, you're just much less likely to get as close to true failure as you do when you train for like 6 reps, right? When you're training in 6 to 8 rep ranges, that type of thing. Because the lower the reps are, the harder you're going to go because it's just a short set. Whereas when you're doing 18 reps, 20 reps, a lot of like those first reps are just going to be going through the motion. And your willpower is going to be a much bigger factor. Cardiovascular fatigue is going to be a much bigger factor. That type of stuff. So you getting to muscular failure is much less likely. Now, of course, if we go very, very, very low reps, right? If we're going for a 1 rep max, a 2 rep max, that type of thing, you're also not training your muscles ideally. You're also probably not training them to failure. Your nervous system is probably getting taxed more than your muscles. But if you are training in a low rep range that is still suitable for hypertrophy, 4 to 6 reps, let's say, or again, 6 to 8, 5 to 8, that kind of rep range, you're still making muscular gains, but since the sets are just much shorter, you generally push much harder. Your willpower is much more sturdy, much more involved. You can just go way harder for a short amount of time. And with long sets, where you're doing a ton of reps, in my experience, even when you're going hard, the muscle is just going to burn way more. And the chances of you quitting maybe like 1, 2, 3 reps shy of true muscular failure are pretty decent. So I think that also plays into it. Generally speaking, you're probably not going as hard on every set, which also means you should be doing more volume. But again, I think also the nervous system recovery, the fatigue you feel just from pushing your nervous system harder, is a pretty significant factor. All that is to say, though, if you're training in higher rep ranges, you can definitely do a shit ton of volume. That's my experience, certainly. You can get away with a lot of volume. And I'm not just talking about isolation exercises for the bis and tris here. I was doing back training for a pretty significant amount of time, like 4 days a week, 5 days a week, out of those 6 days of training. I was training my back almost every day. I was training chest 3 times a week. I was training my shoulders and arms every single fucking day. So I was doing pretty fucking substantial amounts of volume, and I got away with it. And I did push pretty hard on those sets. I might have not gone to full-on true failure on every set, but I was definitely pushing hard. I was definitely adding reps every single session. And I was getting very close to failure, certainly. And I could still recover from that. Now, this video has been a little bit rambly, a little bit here and there, a bit of a trip down memory lane as well. I think to kind of summarize the main points here, for your hypertrophy training, if you're someone like me, if you have the same goals as me, if you want to build the kind of physique I have and I am still working on, which is a generalist, strong, capable body that is also athletic, that has strength endurance and more explosive strength, can go for high 1 rep maxes. You can lift heavy shit, you can run, you can climb, etc. It does make sense to train hypertrophy early on. It definitely does, but you should have a specific goal in mind, as I do. You should have a sort of plan. You should have a rough time frame of what you're going for here. Otherwise, you might end up just falling into a bodybuilding rut and training for hypertrophy for the next fucking 10 years. And then every now and then you're thinking, wait, didn't I want to do more like functional, practical shit as well? Oh, I'm not ready yet. I'll just train a little bit more, I'll build a little bit more muscle mass and I'll take care of that later. So make sure that you have a plan in mind. If you're interested in learning more about building this type of physique, if you want help with that, you can go ahead and check out the Primal Physique course down below, which is exactly on this type of topic. The course goes in depth on how you should train, how you make training a habit in your life at all, how you make it feel like it's more of an everyday activity, not really a chore. That's a big part of the program. There's also diet advice advice on other habits. There are training programs included, a diet plan. So lots of information, very dense package. Go ahead and check out the course. And if you want more of a personal one-on-one type of coaching, you can go ahead and hit me up either on Coffee, where the course is, or you can go ahead and just drop a DM on Instagram and we'll talk about details. I can make you a personalized training program. We can do one-on-one coaching sessions, that type of thing. So again, Primal Physique course on Coffee. It's down below in the description. Go check it out. And if you want to hit me up on Instagram, that's also down below in the description. Go over there and just send me a DM. Back to the topic at hand. Once you have that goal of yours, you should also find room for these side projects, for these other sort of endeavors that you can combine with your hypertrophy training. These other aspects of fitness that are combinable with hypertrophy training. Because if you don't train for any kind of practicality at all, if you just do full-on 100% hypertrophy-focused training for the next 10 years, it's going to be a lot harder to get into a more functional, applied mindset. So what I would recommend is, yes, focus on getting big first, absolutely. That video, or those videos plural, still stand, and I will die on my hill defending that advice. But that isn't everything you should do. You should focus on muscle growth, on building muscle to a very significant extent, but you can do that, again, in my example, in different rep ranges, right? So you can focus more on explosive strength, you can focus more on strength endurance as you're training for muscle growth, just by training in different rep ranges that still allow for hypertrophy. And then maybe you throw like a set or 2 or 4 or 5 in there that are very high reps or very low reps to kind of go a little bit more intense into that specific focus you're setting at the moment. And you can also do this on the side because you're training in the sort of strength and muscle building department is obviously just an hour and a half, something like that, out of your day. And you're probably not even doing it every single day of the week. So you do have a lot of other time for other types of training. And what I talked about in this video is just a general example for a specific focus that I set inside of my strength training. But you should also be training other stuff on the side to kind of prepare you for the point where you've reached your general muscle building goal and you now switch to a different focus like martial arts, like parkour, like some sport, whatever it may be. Maybe train your muscles a little bit less, still train them consistently, but go a little bit harder on other more practically applicable stuff. And you want to be prepared for that again. So have other things on the side, like fighting, like some sport. Maybe you're playing football or whatever. Have something like that outside of strength training. So again, point number 1, have a specific goal in mind for your muscle building journey and a sort of general time frame. Do set lofty goals, absolutely. I want you to reach for the stars. But have a sort of general idea of where you're going and, again, a rough time frame of how long that should take. And then number 2, as I just mentioned, do focus on building muscle first as a young man. Go hard on that hypertrophy training, but you should have other projects on the side. You should focus on other things. Maybe it's explosive strength, maybe it's strength endurance, maybe you want to specifically work on your grip strength. Right now, that's something that's very important to you. Have these side projects. They can actually make your hypertrophy training a lot more fun. And they're just going to be better at preparing you for a sort of paradigm switch to more practical training. And they're also just going to make you more fit, more functional, more capable in the moment as you're training for that ultimate physique, if you will. And then finally, a little bit more specifically, if you are training in higher rep ranges, if you're training more for strength endurance, feel free to go really, really fucking hard. Because the truth is, you can recover from absurd amounts of volume from a lot of fucking work that you just wouldn't be able to do if you were training higher weight, lower rep range. So if your current focus is strength endurance, if that's something you're working for, go fucking hard. Go real fucking hard. And you can use your programming, you can be clever about it to kind of get the rest you might need for this muscle or that muscle, right? You can train 6 days a week and go hard on arms and shoulders every single day, and then kind of have chest and bigger back muscles on alternating days or something like that. But generally speaking, just across the week, go for higher volume. You don't need as much recovery, and just put in the work. If you are training in those higher rep ranges already, you better be doing it a lot. I think that's enough for this rambly video. I'm going to leave it at that. I hope you guys enjoyed it despite the kind of more unstructured approach of this one. If you did, if you learned something, if you found it inspiring, go ahead and drop a like as always. And yeah, leave a comment if you have something to say or you want to push the algorithm for me. If you want to see more videos of mine in the future, go ahead and subscribe. I make content like this on fitness stuff, on training, on building a strong, capable, well-rounded body, a powerful, primal physique. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and subscribe. I also make videos on more general health topics and philosophy on occasion. Maybe you're interested in those things as well. As always, activate the notification bell to get notifications. And yeah, make sure to check out the course down below, or hit me up on Instagram if you want a personal coach or just a personalized training program. That's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. And until then, have a good one.